Today I'm interviewing Chakameh Shafii, Director of Digital Experience for the Fertility Partnership, and we are going to learn all about her thoughts and her work in turning data into human experiences. Hi, Chakameh.
Hello.
I'm so excited to interview you and dig into that brilliant mind of yours. You've been in the space for a while with Tranquil and with your latest project and gig. So let's start by you telling us a little bit about your background and also when we were chatting, you were telling me about your focus on turning data into human experiences. And so I'd love for you to touch on that as you share your background.
I started with mechanical engineering. That's what I studied. I went into IT immediately right after. At that time, I had no idea that within a year I would start a startup in mental health. I had no background in mental health other than the fact that I had grown up with anxiety and I was a patient of the mental health system. We started Tranquil really not knowing so much about the challenges of starting a healthcare company. And it was a telehealth platform that we built in 2015. So it was a long time before everybody got used to using video as a source of communication. And then I journeyed into Berlin. So I'm from Toronto, Canada, and I journeyed into Berlin and I was working in insurtech for a while. And I'm now the director of digital experience at the Fertility Partnership back in healthcare. At this point in my life, I've come to a place where one of the easiest thing for me to do and one of the most valuable things that I do on a daily basis is how to use data to develop and improve the human experience and help people to use their own data to write and use their own stories. People have a bunch of data that are kind of in different places, and being able to put them together and not only help them understand what that means, but also help experts, especially, we're talking about healthcare. If an expert sitting in front of you has a lot of different, places where your data has been and is able to make sense of it, you as a patient will have a better experience. And that's kind of what I mean about human experience design on top of data.
We are also thinking about how to make sense of all this data that's available for people. I actually don't even think we've broken into the value of all that data that's available and how it can add value and benefit people's individual lives. Can you just talk a little bit about telehealth and your experience and also what you're seeing now, kind of, now that we're in the thick of this pandemic?
We were definitely too early in terms of technology, in terms of market, and in terms of human behavior when it came to telehealth. In 2015, HIPAA-compliant video solutions were not, in terms of technology, at a place where they are now. And so it was, tech wasn't there yet. People were not comfortable with video because there was still like a lack of trust. And most importantly, doctors and practitioners were not there yet. They did not believe that, even though in 2015 there were still papers and studies done on the effectiveness of video delivered cognitive behavioral therapy, that we were still having to explain this to doctors without them really agreeing, and they're just nodding their heads. And now we're sitting here, as a person who works in digital experiences of physical things and bringing them to a digital world, I have to say, low key, I'm a little bit glad that COVID did this favor for me of like, people had to accept, telehealth. I'm speaking to doctors and patients who are just like, yeah, I honestly don't care whether it's FaceTime, Zoom, Skype, whatever. And there's, obviously, as a person who understands this, it shouldn't be whatever because, this is your very deep personal information going through. But when it came to, I need to see a doctor, this obsession with privacy went away. And overnight, everyone was like, just use anything. Don't leave your house. And I'm in Europe, and we're opening up again, the clinics, and the doctors are just like, honestly, I'm okay with 90% of my calls being on video now. And so what are the solutions we can use? The tech is like really like so much easier for developers to integrate. So we've come a long way in 5 years, and
I wonder how much privacy is in the conversation today. I'm sure it'll be in the future, but I mean, it's not, I don't even think it's in everyday language and conversation. So I'm really curious to see what kinds of apps and platforms come to life that are really thinking about patient information. You know, we know that it takes urgent times to create shift, right? So you know, so many things have changed. So many models and approaches to, you know, to life have changed because of this pandemic. So yeah, really excited to see the developments there. You know, we know that there are a number of different kind of applications and platforms focusing on allowing for more and more data to be tracked, like digital therapeutics as an example, wearables, devices, etc. So I'd love to know from you kind of what role you see data playing in the treatment of various health conditions.
It's a very interesting time because it might be the first time where, regardless of what part of the world you're in, you're going to have empathy for a fellow human in a different part of the world. I personally think is that in times of chaos, we are given the opportunity to rebuild structures and systems from scratch. This is a golden opportunity for us to utilize this common sense and empathy that now exists within patients all around the world, to get them to commit to sharing their data for the advancements of the human species as a common, you know, we are all together in this. And every sort of health issue that we deal with, maybe our bodies, depending on our race and ethnicity, will vary in terms of how we react to it, but we are all susceptible to it, no matter our class or race. And I think this, you know, we, being in healthcare, are responsible to make sure that patients understand the power they have to share their data with us, so that, you know, we can then share with institutes, so that we can better and faster react with treatments.
Relaying the message to them that the data, you know, the data will benefit both themselves and the greater ecosystem. And by benefiting the ecosystem, it's also in turn helping them. I think where we all struggle is in really understanding how do we empower people to share their data. Obviously, there's the education piece, there's the storytelling piece, there's the empathy piece, you know, there's finding ways to relate to patients and holding space for them and understanding, you know, what some of their pain points are. I'd love to talk about data ownership. And there's so much rich information out there, and there's so many owners, whether it's hospitals, institutions, governments, you know, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. And often the patient is just left out. And, you know, the question that we've asked ourselves is, what would happen if the patient played a role in owning or co-owning or managing their data? Would they feel more empowered? And how do you create an infrastructure to allow them to own their data? We have one method, which is a blockchain-based system that allows patients to own their data through and share it through smart contracts, where they're very much consenting. So it's all about patient consent, and, you know, and giving them the chance to consent and share, and also create an expiry on that sharing. So I'd love to understand from your perspective, what does data ownership look like for you?
I think it's what you guys are doing is exactly right on where we need to be going, because, you know, we have governments reporting data right now on COVID-19, which are mainly relying on hospitals and institutions and the data they report. And then we're sitting here and thinking, are countries, you know, really reporting the right data? Are countries using the same methods to report the data? Because there's one country who counts everybody as COVID positive when they report. Some people say, no, this person died of diabetes, even though COVID was the trigger. So there's no standardization. Whereas if there was a single system, and that's where blockchain, what you're describing, is something that can go beyond boundaries, which, you know, healthcare is an example, but we should be going beyond boundaries in many other aspects of our lives as well. Getting the patient to also share that information and you know, go to the hospital or the doctor and say, this is also my information. And so share with me. And then they would then, with these contracts, share it with the world, and institutions can tap into it with the consent of the patient and use this for research.
Yeah, no, and that also brings up the topic of data portability. And with data portability, we have limits with healthcare because of privacy policies like HIPAA, PIPEDA, GDPR. And so I'm curious actually from your end, because you experienced HIPAA in Canada with Tranquil, and then now you're in Berlin, and you've had a couple of projects in Berlin with your newest one, and having to think about GDPR. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you and kind of understand what differences you saw between building these tech products in Canada versus Germany.
When I first moved here from Toronto, I was confronted with this notion of Europeans have very strict regulations. Everything's highly regulated here. It's going to be really hard to innovate. But what I love about GDPR and the way it was implemented, because I was here in 2018 when it started, is how the framing, and again, going back to the way things are told through stories and the way we use our words and frame things, it was framed as a patient-centric act. We are doing this to empower the customer, right? Going back to data ownership again. And that reframing took it away from this is something the government is pushing down onto us as a company, to actually this is the right of every individual to email or text or call any app or a developer, any company, and say, remove my data. And for every person to say, I need to know what you're doing with my data. Is there Google tracker on your, is Google tracking my information? And if so, I opt out. Now, 2 years in, it's no longer a barrier to innovation. And now it actually is beautiful because you're sitting around a table with people from marketing, from development, from engineering to design, and everyone now says this is the right of the patient. No one is, oh man, GDPR.
I can only hope that kind of mindset shift takes place in North America. Do you feel like we're still years away from that?
So I think the difference between North America and Europe is also the consumers themselves. I don't know about you, but I've rarely read the terms and conditions that I agree to, right? And it's like, unless it's a very specific product. The first encounter I had with this was when I just moved to Berlin and we were running some user testings on some new products that we were launching. And people were actually opening up the terms and conditions and reading them in a user test. North America and America in general, I don't think they're gonna have to do this. It's because the patients are not really asking for it. It's kind of like labor unions, Someone needs to represent the right of the people.
In your new position as the Director of Digital Experience for the Fertility Partnership, you're now exploring gender-based data or female data. And so I'm curious to hear from you what your thoughts are on some of the gender discrimination in research.
This is a topic that has been just boiling my blood a little bit. I'm not okay with any of this at all, because, now I have to sit and think that what can I do so that at least the next generation is going to know what the correlation between their menstrual cycle and their physical health is. Because unfortunately, no one was thinking about this prior to this, because for some reason, they assumed even though we have different organs, we're going to act the same way. Somehow there was the assumption that we have the same bodies as men. And I don't want to get into a whole feminist topic here, but it's the same with race. It's the same with availability of people when it comes to research. So I really appreciate it when I read papers and they specifically say this was done on 25 to 30-year-old white men or 25 to 30-year-old white women, because that at least gives you a sense of how much can I trust this, because you can't generalize. At the Fertility Partnership, we have historically from many years, we have millions of data sets of data on women, And we've published paper on the correlations between, you know, your ethnicity and your preferences and your fertility. And it just now, like, you know, now we're going to like expand on that and try to see if people are going to give us access or consent to share other aspects of their healthcare. Because, you know, I was telling one of our more senior managers that at what we're trying to do, the future of what we are building is that women are beyond their uterus. And that's kind of what we're trying to say, is that there's so many other aspects of your body that no one's thought about or just recently has started to look into. And that's my number one agenda right now.
Yeah. Women are beyond our uterus. I love it. And you mentioned, you know, this term patient-centric healthcare. And that's a term that I use quite often. And, you know, and I have big dreams about the future of healthcare, obviously being in the space that we're in. Where do you see healthcare going, let's say 5 years from now?
Data empowered patients is the way of the future. And borderless data empowerment is a part of it, because we are, I mean, not at this very moment during COVID, but we are a globalized society. We travel often, we live in different parts, and we should have access to our health record regardless of where we are, because it is our health record, not the health record of the government. So that's step one. But also thinking about telehealth, I struggle with this one because so, you know, we're having video calls, and this is, you can see my full body, you know, my reactions, the way I'm speaking. In mental health, we're talking about VR assisted therapy using psychedelics, because a psychedelic therapist is not going to be able to be everywhere all the time, right? But there will be clinics with a psychotherapist, maybe not certified to administer psychedelics, who can actually sit there with the patient. This person puts that VR set on and goes through the journey with another doctor. Or a VR set used to teach people how to do physiotherapy, how to massage different parts of their body that's hurting. So, you know, VR and AR is going to potentially come into the same family as telehealth when we talk about telehealth. And then finally, this is a part that, again, data is needed, but hopefully we can get there with people's consent, and that's personalized pharmaceutical and personalized healthcare. And when I say personalized, one thing that you and I are both big fans of is personalized also means holistic healthcare. It means I choose not to take always chemicals. I choose to think about the correlation between my ancestors and the type of food and the type of herbs that I should be using. So that personalized medicine, I think personally, combined with consent from the patient to share their data, is going to be the future. So beyond 23andMe, what else is there, you know, when it comes to personalized medicine?
The idea of data portability is still one. I mean, it's a big dream of mine. I mean, I wish, you know, I can take my phone with me anywhere in the world and have, you know, I'm in Mumbai right now. I wish I could just go to a doctor here and with, you know, whether it's biometric tracking my iris, you know, or finger tracking, I could access all of my data fully encrypted and then share that with the doctor here without having to fill out, you know, so many different forms, because that just causes fatigue and burnout and frustration. And that's the one where I'm hopeful. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Going back to what I said about empathy with each other, I really hope that this new world we're going to come out of COVID to has a lot more empathy, because, you know, healthcare, but even beyond healthcare, we're all the same. And we have to contribute together to the betterment of all of us together. So whether it's with our data in this conversation, or it's with our time and with our energy. And I really hope that we don't forget this, that I'm optimistic we won't.
Thank you. Thank you for being a global citizen and for sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much for tuning in and learning with us. Chakameh is brilliant and has lots to share, and it's wonderful to know that she, like us, supports patient data ownership, personalized medicine, and borderless healthcare. If you'd like to follow along our journey, please subscribe or visit us at www.bowheadhealth.com. Thank you.